Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Agioff. I'm the president of the Metro Maryland ARMA chapter, and we are presenting this webinar this evening. A couple of things I wanted to mention. We will be having a virtual social event for chapter members and alumni in June. So if you're one of those two, please get in touch with us. We'll have an announcement going out as well with more details, but we would like to get together with our members and our former members and have a nice kind of low-key event. It will be virtual, so be looking for that.
Well, also, I'd like to add in, Carol, that if people register by the Friday before, so it's the June 14th is the virtual banquet, that we will be supplying them with a gift card to something like DoorDash or Uber Eats so that they can actually have their banquet meal in their own house. So, you know, in order to do that, you need to be an alumni of the chapter or an active member of the chapter, and make sure that you respond by the close date that we supply in the upcoming announcement, which will be either, well, both by email and then it'll be also on the Facebook page.
Well, I know I'm going to apply early so I can get some crab dip.
But see, that's the beauty of it. You can get whatever you want.
And my second announcement is I'd just like to offer an opportunity to everyone, and that opportunity is to serve as a member of our chapter board. This is the time of year where we look to recruit new members for the board for the upcoming chapter year, which begins on July 1st. And we have some openings available. You can serve as a director, and there are a variety of things you can help us out with: planning meetings, setting up the meetings, recruiting speakers, recruiting vendors,
Recruiting
members. So there's quite a few different things you can get involved in, and you can get involved in more than one thing.
Updating our website.
Yes, we have a website and social media sites as well, which need to be kept up.
And so, we do a lot of cooperative activities with the Northern Virginia and with the DC, Greater Washington, DC chapters too. So you could help play a part in that.
And it's also a good opportunity to acquire some leadership skills, to meet new people, to put on your resume, and learn new aspects of records management and organizational management. So if you're interested in an opportunity to serve on our board, we would be happy to talk with you. Just drop us an email at president@arma-metromd.org. So, Beth, would you like to introduce tonight's speaker?
Okay, so tonight we have Rae Lynn Haliday, and she is somebody who has been a very active member of ARMA over the years and with the Institute of Certified Records Managers. And she works at the St. Louis Zoo as the registrar. And tonight she's going to talk about the records program that they have at the St. Louis Zoo. So I will let her explain. Wait on. If you have any slides, feel free to share them. And
Okay.
Rae Lynn, do you have any preference for people saving up questions till the end, or can they ask as you're going?
You know, it's pretty casual here. If I'm talking and you want to ask a question then so you don't forget it, that's fine. It's not a big deal.
Okay.
So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen. I'll start this up. I've actually given this talk a few times lately and different, you know, customized it here and there for the audience, but this is something that's pretty easy. It's been my life for the last 32 years, so I'm pretty comfortable talking about it. So Rae Haliday and I have been the registrar at the St. Louis Zoo for 32 years. I started in 91. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. So I worked at the zoo there. It was my first job out of high school. I started there when I was 17. Really, my goal was to be a curator, to manage an animal collection. So I started working there, and to get my foot in the door in the gift shops. I drove the tour bus. I worked in the distribution center. I worked in all the food stands, and then I started college in northern Wisconsin. So I went 26 hours away to go to school to get a biology degree at an environmental liberal arts school in northern Wisconsin. And so the Texas girl in northern Wisconsin was difficult because I hadn't, I was not used to that much snow, that much cold. So I was a keeper at the San Antonio Zoo the 2 summers I went up there, and then I decided I want to go back there. And it took me a while to get back to finishing my formal education. But in that interim step, I tried to get on at the zoo as a full-time animal keeper, and I had an apartment and bills to pay, and there was just nothing available at that time. So this records job came up. I thought, I'll do that until I can get on as a full-time keeper. And, it ticked all the boxes for me. I loved organization. I loved all the legal compliance, all the wildlife laws and regulations that I had to deal with. And little did I know that temporary job would be the beginning of a lifelong career for me, managing records in zoos. Now, I say managing records, but at that time, it was real industry specific based, and there was very little knowledge about what good records management was. So starting at ground zero, that's pretty much how I started in my career. So we'll go ahead and get into this. So I do not need to explain this slide to you guys. You all know this, but every area here, I've worked on building this program from the ground up for the St. Louis Zoo, from policies and procedures for records management to our first retention schedule, to our first forms inventory, forms creation, form automation, all of that stuff. Dealing with the active records, moving, starting the transition to electronic records management, microfilming, vital records, storing that film, maintaining it, using it as an active system, and then retiring it and storing it in a state-funded archives, developing a training program, and an auditing process. So as you all know, that took a well thought out strategy. It took a lot of patience. It took accepting small wins over 3 decades to get to where we are today. So I'll just share some of what I learned and what we have at the end of that very long road where we're at now. Building senior management support was, when I started in 91, it was a brand new position. It was the first registrar position. Zoos were beginning to create that position. It's sort of an antiquated title. It just doesn't really reflect what I do. But, it's all the records management, all the wildlife permit compliance, animal shipping, domestic and international. And because we're a highly regulated industry, it really impacts what we do with records. And I committed to advancing REM in the zoo profession about 25 years ago, because I just knew we are not doing enough with records, not given the importance, all the research that we do and the wildlife permit compliance. We have to make sure the people we have in these positions know what they're doing. So here's just 2 slides on it. I boiled this down as succinctly as I could with time span. So I started in 91. In 93, I realized instantly this zoo had records everywhere. It was 100% paper-based when I started. There was stuff in basements, there was stuff in ledgers, there was stuff in repositories, there were 12 file cabinets outside my office. Lots of things for improvement. Now, as you know, when you first start in this, you think you can improve everything and you want to do it overnight. And then all the tough lessons happen where people train you that, no, we're not going to turn up everything upside down and change it just because you think you're in charge now. And so the first decade I was at the zoo, I learned a lot of those hard lessons, that you have to prioritize and you have to build those relationships, find those champions, engage partners in all those key places, IT, legal, and whatnot. And so my biggest champion that first year, starting in '93, was the controller. She got it. She came from General Motors. She knew records management was important. I was working on developing, getting my certification, going back, finishing my education. And we started partnering on everything records management. So she was really key to me building those relationships and building that respect and profile to really be able to help the zoo with the records. We started out, her and I applied for the 3 grants that the Missouri Local Records Program, they had come out with a new grant program in '93. And all of these records, I wanted to get a microfilm so that they were, they were historical records. They had a historical value to the state of Missouri. So we were able to qualify for the grant. We did 3 grants, and all of those records and those file cabinets, we microfilmed them. At that time, we had a microfiche system that we used as a working copy. So we went from 12 file cabinets to a little box on my office wall. Then all the original camera masters were stored in the Missouri State Archives vault. We automated the index to our animal transaction files, which was most of the content in those file folders or in those files. So we got an index, we knew what we had, we implemented a color-coded filing system. And so just small things, small milestones, small changes, gradually organizing the information, getting control of the information. We worked with the state of Missouri to develop our first retention schedule. So there were none of the core business records, the industry specific record series, none of that was scheduled. We followed the zoo didn't follow the Missouri General Retention Schedule, but the process of getting the zoo schedule in place, we then knew, okay, we can follow the general schedule as well, and we should, as a business working in the state of Missouri. So we then began in 2000 to 2010, we slowly began the roadmap to automation in addressing the life cycle concept of managing records. So we brought the retention schedule on board, condensed record series where we needed to. I still have boxes that will occasionally come up to me to look through old director records that were shoved in the top of a building or down in a basement. But we now have the schedule in place so we can crosswalk that documentation. If it's not anything we need, we shred it. And if it's something we can incorporate into a existing record series, we can do that. We worked with a consultant later in 2010 to develop a schedule for the Zoo Friends Association. We developed the records hold policy and a records transfer process for mainly our paper accounting records. There was such a huge volume of those records. Nothing had ever been thrown away. And so, and again, that was under the controller. That was projects that she needed done, and she kind of put me in charge of those. Then we really, 2014 was a big year, but leading up to that, we started the zoo profession, the zoo industry, mainly the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, thought that we needed we needed to modernize our record keeping system that we had. So it was DOS based, it hadn't been updated in many years. And so that took about 5 years for them to do the search and figure out what system we were going to move to and how it would be implemented and how it would be coordinated with the other zoo regions around the world. But at the end of the day, the Species 360 is the vendor that develops all our animal record keeping softwares. There's a lot of different kinds that we use, but for institutional animal records, it's called ZIMS, the Zoological Information Management System. And so we took a look at that, and the first version came out in 2012, and we knew that we would not be able to use it. It was wide open. Everybody could see everything internally. So even if you were not working with a specific animal, you had complete access to that animal's record. You could accidentally enter something in the record that shouldn't have been in there. You know, it's just too wide open. A software like that would never sell on the open market, right? So our zoo, the St. Louis Zoo, paid a pretty good amount of money for an enhancement to be able to control access, and that's called the Advanced Access Management feature. So that's a core piece of our framework for records management control at the St. Louis Zoo. It also facilitated us being able to allow our animal keepers to directly enter information in the system, rather than one person. A lot of registrars at a lot of zoos are the only people that enter stuff in the system, which is not a good thing. When you're the only person ever looking at that information, we're all human, we make mistakes, but it's very much the records police mentality. And this system, ZIMS, was designed to have a lot of different roles. It's a role-based program, a lot of different information, or people throughout the zoo entering different types of information. The core information that we use ZIMS for is husbandry. So that can be anything from observations that the keepers make of the animals on a day-to-day basis, how they're doing, their behaviors, how they're interacting with each other. Maybe they're showing symptoms that they might have something in their foot, or they might be not feeling well or not feeling normal. These are all observations and information. It might be animal training. Keepers are training them to do certain behaviors. It could be enrichment information where they're giving them certain food items or a boomer ball or a rope or something that they can play with and interact with throughout the day. Collectively, all those different categories is termed husbandry information. And that's what I manage in the department, all of those people that enter that information. The vets manage all of the medical information, and that's only entered by veterinarians or vet techs. So it's a huge amount of information that is captured on a day-to-day basis. So that was the first big thing that we did. And that was, we rolled it out in 2013. We created a mandatory training program. And then in 2014, we were ready. You know, as I said, we had developed a color-coded system. We had done a lot of stuff with the physical records to make them more organized. We wrote a manual so that all of these processes were captured in a manual with workflows and very detailed procedures about how all this information gets captured and how it's managed. In 2014, we were ready to look for an electronic document management system. Records had been created digitally for quite some time, but we were still storing physical records. So, you know, things are created digitally, but then they're printed out and stored in the paper-based system. So we went through that period, which I think a lot of companies do, but we knew it was too much. It was too much to try to deal with email records and digital records and still be relying on physical record storage. So we went out, 5 or 6 companies. We did the RFP process. I was the first department in the zoo. We did have SharePoint, but SharePoint was implemented for a zoo-wide communication system. It wasn't really implemented for any kind of records management at that time. So the Registrar Department was the first to do the first RFP process for an electronic document management system. We implemented DocuWare in 2014. We did an upgrade to a better workflow manager in 2015. And then every year just continued to leverage that software to do more and more, do more automation, better business, process mapping and all of that. In 2020, even with COVID happening, we had budgeted to move from locally hosted system to cloud hosted system. And we were approved to do it, and then COVID hit, but we were able to do it. And that made a huge, it was a huge improvement just because we didn't have to have all these DocuWare printers on everybody's desktop. We had a lot of people using this, 60 to 100, somewhere around close to 100 people using DocuWare. And every time they would do a system upgrade, everyone would have to go through IT to get back in the system, their first login after the update. So plus the really nice thing is it allowed us to manage our licensing better. We didn't need a full workflow license for all of these people, only for admins. Everyone else could just do a simple workflow license, which was about half the cost. We also got all of the modules when we moved to cloud hosting. So rather than having to pay for each module we were using, we kind of prioritized when we first bought into the system to only use the modules that were must-haves. We didn't have the forms module out of the gate, which is something we really needed. So we were able to get all of that. That was a major advancement in 2020. And then last year, you know how it works. You get more and more of these systems going, and then you're logging in different credentials, downloading, getting things signed, re-uploading. And that was just becoming too inefficient for my assistant. So we did an integration, which has gone really well. So she can log in to DocuWare, she can create the form, she can set it up for signature through DocuSign, it gets sent off. And when it's fully executed, it stores right in the file that it needs to be stored in. So, this is what we do. Every year we look at how we can use this system to help continue to automate and streamline. The big thing this year is we have 2 additional properties. One of them was bequested to the zoo about 33 years ago. And we never really did too much with the property. We didn't really know. It was about an hour out. It's 325 acres. It's a lot of land. But U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Wild Canid Center in St. Louis, which has a lot of species of wolves and different canids or dog species that they work with and have worked with for many years. They did a collaboration with the St. Louis Zoo. We have this property. It's perfect space for breeding wolves. Wolves are very secretive and they don't like a lot of commotion, a lot of people around them. It wouldn't be that great to have them on habitat and try to breed them. It probably wouldn't go well. So out there at this property, we can have them. And so we have 9 of the 12 animals that will be out there. It'll never be open to the public. And then we have the Wild Care Park, which was another property. I think we purchased that in 2018. It's 425 acres. It used to be the Pipe Fitters Union place. They had it for many, many decades. And a lot of structure, a lot of buildings, all kinds of stuff out there. But the Wild Care Park will be open to the public in 2027. It'll have like a safari experience to it. It might have like bed and breakfast type stuff. It'll have research. There'll be a lot of education out there for the community that to be able to go out there and participate in. So all of that, because we have DocuWare and because we have ZIMS, and we have that advanced access management feature, onboarding these additional facilities has actually been pretty easy. The hardest thing about it is remembering which property you get a pick list and switch institution, and you have to make sure before, either as an administrator, I'm the administrator, my employee's the data manager, so she's entering records, I'm usually onboarding staff and giving them access. You have to just make sure you're in the parent organization if you're onboarding new people, or you're in the right institution if you're adding records. So that was a big change for us, and not many people get to do this. So the fact that Lily and I are involved in, they're developing 2 new properties, and we have a big stake in that with the records management piece. So that's been pretty fun. So just to recap, these are our systems. Our infrastructure is based around DocuWare for our document management, ZIMS for our data management. We use SharePoint too. SharePoint is where everything that's not really appropriate to be in DocuWare. DocuWare is really our archives. It's our active records. Also, not stuff that's more transient, more policies and just things that's dynamic information that we use. That's what we store on SharePoint. I'll show you some screenshots of what we do with SharePoint. And then Thinkific is where we manage our current training program, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. It's an off-the-shelf learning management system for online training, and we have a mandatory training program for ZIMS and DocuWare, 200 plus people in various roles recording animal and veterinary information. And then I think it's around 60 people now that use DocuWare, and that's either for workflows, and most of the workflows have a repository attached to them, and we'll go through some of those screens. So ZIMS, again, the Zoological Information Management System, it is a role-based, web-based animal record keeping system that is used by around 1,300 zoos across the world in different zoological regions, regional associations that are zoos. There's 125 plus animal keepers that enter husbandry data. We have 15 veterinary related staff recording animal medical data. And then my assistant, she records all the pedigree and transactional type data. So every time an animal is born or dies, or we have animals that we purchase, or we have come in on loan, or we ship animals to other zoos, she takes care of all that information. So all of these people are entering this husbandry or medical information all day, every day. The collection size, including invertebrates and hellbenders, is 483 species. And this is the current inventory, and 16,072 animals if you include the invertebrates and hellbenders. We have over 5,000 hellbenders. This has been in the media lately. We started with a conservation center for hellbenders, which are native to the state of Missouri, but they were going extinct in the wild. And many of our staff and staff from other zoos as well spent, I think, 2 decades working on how to breed these animals in captivity, and then doing releases to the wild, capturing, bringing them from the wild in partnership with Missouri Department of Conservation. And they found now, after all of the reintroductions back to the wild, they have now found that animals that were bred in captivity have now bred in the wild. So that's really pretty cool. So, we get to manage all this stuff, and not too bad. So DocuWare and ZIMS, this is just, I'm not going to go to, I think we've talked about most of this. I do want to say with DocuWare, this was something that we were able to automate all of our workflows for animal transactions. So, you know, all the curators propose bringing animals to the zoo or shipping animals to other zoos for breeding recommendations or whatever it may be. And we do a lot of shipments at our zoo. We're considered a large zoo, so probably 200 a year, and that's a lot. That's a lot that transactions may need permits. There's a lot of paperwork that has to be done when you ship animals. Vet checks have to be done, tests have to be done. It's each animal shipment is a project. And so DocuWare has been great for that. This is our SharePoint site. So again, this is kind of our identity. Most departments at the zoo have a SharePoint site. So it's all your specific department information. We have our links to the forms in DocuWare. We have links to the AZA accreditation standards, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have links to our training program, documentation, our retention schedules, and so forth. So just a quick snapshot of DocuWare. This is just the dashboard and what it looks like. So I did use those arrows to kind of redact some of the information we don't want out there, but this is just dashboard. So it shows you document trays. We've got file cabinets. This is where you go to, as an administrator, if I click this down arrow here, that's where I can go to configurations and assign licenses and provide access and roles to people using the system. When you want to import something, you import it here to store it in the various file cabinets. So these are all the repositories, file cabinets, whatever you want to call them, same thing that we have. And again, most of these are connected to a workflow. So once something is approved through a workflow, it goes in the repository. So you can see we have education related documentation, we have veterinary records, we have animal transaction files. We have, now that we have these multiple properties, we might be transferring animals that we own to just the different properties. So we created a separate system for managing paperwork for animal transfers between our St. Louis Zoo properties. We have some research stuff here. We have our vendor contracts and business continuity plans, our wildlife permit files, our public information requests for animal records, more research stuff here, our registrar daily weekly reports. Most of the units have to do a daily report of all animal activity in their area. So all the animals they care for, they send a report to Lily with the stuff that she is responsible for entering into ZIMS. And we keep these reports permanently because all of those reports legitimize the actual entries into the record keeping system. Then we have our forms, and all this other stuff is related to the DocuSign DocuWare integration. Here's all our forms. So these are all the current forms. All curators have to do is just log in, pick the form, fill it out, submits through the workflow. We have file statuses assigned to each of the animal transaction files. Once everything has been signed off on, we have any permits, everything's fully executed, Lily will update the file status to ready for shipment. The curators can log in, they can do reports on all the proposed animal transactions they've submitted, what's pending, what's ready for shipment, and so forth. And there is an occasion where we cannot clear all of the requirements for an animal shipment and we have to cancel it. And we have that process in here. So it's still in there. So you could go back and look and see why something wasn't able to be shipped. And you can see the reasons why it was canceled. This is just an example. This is the index for the animal transaction file. So you can see all of the different pieces of information that we can search by. So it really is it's been great. It's been great being able to fully transition to electronic records management. I will say this, you can never get comfortable. Just when you think, all right, we nailed it, something gets updated. It's time to migrate. It's time to change. Business needs change, and this is no longer fitting the need. So it's not something you can ever be comfortable that, you know, you're going to be here for a long time. That's the trade-off for going electronic. So I will say after 30 years of all these milestones, when COVID hit, as there were so many bad things that came with that pandemic. We had many people that changed jobs. They left the zoo. They got sick. Some of them didn't survive. They died. The good thing, the positive thing that we can say is because of the work that we had put in, years and years of hard work. And I say many people, I had many supporters, many partners. The first 10 years was tough, but after that, I figured out what I was doing, and we made a lot of great headway, and we made really positive strides in the zoo community as a whole as well, not just our zoo. It paid off. It paid off in spades, because my boss came into the office on March 12th and said, in 2 days, whoever can work from home needs to go work from home because the zoo is closing down. Closing meaning we were closed for 4 months. We all took it could have been a lot worse, but we all took a percentage pay cut. Our keepers were doing split teams, because you didn't want to have a situation where someone got COVID and then the whole team was taken out. So we'd have in a single unit, they'd split the teams in half. The first team would come in and work for 4 hours, get as much done as they could, and they would go home and they could do their record keeping from home, since we had all these processes digitized. Zoos that were paper-based couldn't. What happened was you've got employees taking paper records from the zoo to their homes. The time to get that information entered was much longer, so you ended up with backlogs of information not entered, or in the worst case scenario, you had people that just couldn't do the records. They couldn't do the records because they couldn't get to the stuff they needed. So, and I'm not bragging in any way, I'm just saying this right here is the case, the benchmark to say this is the reason why you do this. Not just because a pandemic may hit, a one-off like that, but you never know. You never know what's going to happen. And the in-person training for keepers and staff, we had to evolve. So we were doing, which I always hated anyway, but we were doing, the lectures with the PowerPoint and talk for 2 hours. And then we create their accounts and, we do compliance checks to make sure they were following the training. But that's just not the best way to train people. Then when COVID hit, we moved that same process into using Zoom, and we made the decision, okay, we're gonna, in 2020, into 21, 22, we are gonna develop online courses and do this asynchronously. I was teaching for a university. I've got my first teaching job, and that helped me tremendously understand how to use the learning management system, how to come up with good learning outcomes, and how to build a good training educational program. So ThinkAFIC again is very cost efficient. We had, with the Zoological Registrars Association, we built a training program there as well. And we had done a lot of these evaluations of these learning management systems, including with ThinkAFIC. So I already kind of knew that one would probably work well for our zoo. We got it approved. We started in November of 21, and we rolled out 9 modules in June of 22. So we're evaluating everything now. We had a lot of our students that come. We have students from a lot of MLIS and RIM graduate certificate programs that we have them do our internships. And so we had them beta test all the modules, and we made a lot of great improvements with them doing that. So that worked out really well. Post-pandemic, hybrid work schedules in place for our department as well as other departments in the zoo. So I have some on-site interns right now, so I'm going to the zoo more. than normal. And that's great. It gives me a chance to be on site. I work with them with projects that really aren't suitable for virtual internships, but we have a lot of virtual internships as well. So I would have never thought in a million years the zoo would allow us to work from home. But we proved to them, because again, of all the work we did with digitizing all these processes, that we're as productive, if not more productive now, without the commute, without people coming in your office talking to you, the phone ringing, all the distractions that you have in the office. My most productive days are definitely when I'm working remotely. And these are just a few of the major standards, GLOMRIM. And I say ISO 15489 just because most of the standards, as they evolve and stuff, they kind of, a lot of them go back to that. So I just figured, RIM core components of RIM, our AZA accreditation standards for records. And again, that's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And then the ARMA principles and maturity model for RIM program. So we created a policy last year when we developed the training modules. And basically what I did was I took there was 5 new accreditation standards for records, which is all the stuff that's been missing, like retention schedules and business continuity plans, and an emphasis on transitioning to electronic records and having a mandatory training program for anyone that's using these systems to create records. All of that maps back to how each one of these standards maps to one of those 8 principles, whether it's transparency, accountability, so forth. I wish I could show it to you, but you get the gist. And then we have the state of Missouri local records. So all of the state records management program, the services, resources, and the requirements that we follow. These are the accreditation standards for records. So this happened in 2019. It was a committee, but it was broken into 2 task force. I led the task force for the records management. So updating and modernizing the accreditation standards for records. Never thought this would happen. And before I retired, that AZA, which when AZA does something and it becomes an accreditation standard, it's huge. It's the validation and the teeth that you need to be able to move the needle with records management or whatever it is, whatever it be concerning needing a standard. So here's the areas here that I just kind of went over, but these are where the standards were updated. There's also other standards. There's a total of 12 standards for records. So now we've got a lot of zoos that are working to update their processes, provide their registrars with the resources they need for skill development, or, to address any gaps they have and to build their RIM programs. I'm not going to go through too much of these because this is just a case study. These are slides. You can look at them later if you want, but they're just showing, because we used a lot of the processes that we have in place at the St. Louis Zoo as the basis for updating the standards. This just kind of illustrates how the zoo is meeting those standards. We essentially met the standards when they were released. The training program, one of the standards says now that if you are entering records and ZIMs, whether you are a registrar or an animal keeper, you must be trained. And so that's why our training program is mandatory. And then this just gives the experience that our zoo, that says how we meet the standard. We have a mandatory training program. Everyone is trained. And then the advanced access management feature is an important piece of our framework and how we control access. And then these are just our key policies, our records retention schedule and policy, our ZIMS and AAM use policies. So that has all of the roles, what you can do under each role, which is really important. It's for transparency, so everybody understands if you're a keeper, this is what you can do in the system. The animal and veterinary information management data sharing policy, that's the one I said where we're mapping to the 8 principles with each of the accreditation standards. It also specifically calls out authorized and unauthorized uses of animal and veterinary information. When you go through the training module 1, that's all the policies and systems and policies at the St. Louis Zoo for animal and veterinary records. You have to sign off on the ZIMS and AAM and the data sharing policy and acknowledge it and that you're going to follow it. We never had that before, and that's really important to have that. And then these are all, we have our business continuity plans, our backup and recovery plan, and then some of this other stuff is just very industry specific. And then finally, just our training. This is just a snapshot of Think of Thick in the 9 modules. We have 2 DocuWare modules, and then the rest of them, the 7 modules are all ZIMS related. So we have a shortened module for our interns and externs, our vet students. The module 2 is for our animal keepers, and that goes over everything that they have to do as far as record keeping duties, and specifically how they do that. When they're going through the module, they'll watch the lessons, they'll listen to some videos, they'll have assignments that they actually have to do in the sandbox of ZIMS. So we give them a login that they go in and they have to actually do assignments in their applications in the sandbox to demonstrate that they've met the learning outcomes. And when we create their ZIMS account, they'll know how to do everything that they learned. So that was the biggest improvement that we made over the PowerPoint lectures, whether it was in person or Zoom, is having people take this training. They actually have to do the stuff that they're learning, not just do it for the first time once they have a ZIMS account. And I think, oh, one more. This is just the training, really I added this today because I want to just emphasize that we have a lot of interns, 13 to 20 a year. And I don't know what that thing is on the screen. Is that a typo? 13 to 20 virtual or in-person interns and externships completed through the Registrar Department each year. We have that many projects. Lily and I's jobs have expanded tenfold over the last even 5 years. So it's really hard to get new heads. We've asked and we'll continue to ask, but in the interim, we love that we can increase awareness about zoo careers, that we can have students from MLIS RIM graduate certificate programs working with our RIM program to help us keep advancing it, to help them with their careers, advancing their careers. So it's something that I am very committed to. It also supports our diversity, inclusion, and accessibility goals. We just have students from everywhere. I had my first international student this spring. He just completed an internship. Had him working on site with one of our records projects. And so, you know, I'm looking maybe 6 to 8 years, I'll retire. I love my job. I can't. I've had frustrations, you know, like anyone does, but I have to say it's been amazing working for the St. Louis Zoo, and they've been really supportive and helping letting me build this program and supporting me in what I need to do and giving me the flexibility and the rope to take risk and to try things that we hadn't done before. So feel pretty lucky. All right. Well, I think that's all I have. I can take questions. I don't know if there were any in the chat.
This is Beth. I have a question. You talked about, you know, you have microfiche and you had employees taking records home to work on them during the pandemic. What is the normal way that you capture information? Do you, like you have people entering veterinary information, husbandry information? Do they have tablets, or are they doing it by laptops? Do you have workstations? I'm just kind of curious how you're getting all that information into those
Yeah.
document man.
So I was just clarify the one statement about people taking home paper. We didn't have people doing that because we were digitized. I was giving the scenario of a lot of my colleagues that are still 100% paper-based and what they were having to do with us. You know, the keepers do have some like little note tablets and things, like especially with enrichment and training, they will make their notes and then they will capture that information in the database. And so that stuff is more transient, it's temporary, they get it in the database, then it becomes permanent once it's entered in ZIMS. So yes, there might have been some of that, but you know, it's not like they had boxes of files and paper they had to take home. Everything is in DocuWare or ZIMS. So as they're making observations throughout the day, most of the keepers sit down at the end of the day and they record that information in ZIMS, whether it's from a tablet or from just knowing what they did each day. They have prescriptions, they have stuff that's vet prescribed, and they've got the prescription that says you have to give this to the animal once a day or 3 times a day. So they're operating from that knowledge. I gave this animal this medicine 3 times today. Or they give enrichment. They have their little tablets with their notes on enrichment, and then they'll put that in the information. Then those reports they submit through DocuWare, and they're automatically stored appropriately in DocuWare. Then Lily gets an alert that she has a report, and she just checks the report against their entries. Some of the information is provisional, like identifiers, their tattoos, their bands. That's all provisional because she has to check to make sure it's entered correctly. And then she'll fully accession the animal, and then the report, it just stays filed. It's stored automatically. Did that
So
answer
do you,
your questions?
yeah, I mean, I'm also curious because I deal with veterinary records too. So
Oh.
does your, Center for Veterinary Medicine at Food and Drug Administration?
Oh my God, that's awesome. I didn't know. I almost asked you what your job was earlier.
Yeah, I pushed the mail cart around. No, actually. But anyway, so I'm wondering also, like, you know, in the use of maybe tablets or digital cameras or anything, do they also enter like photographic records, you know, JPEGs or something to support maybe, you know, like a injury or something that an animal might have just for the record?
So the keepers do not enter veterinary information. There's 3 codes on that ZIMS note type template. There's a whole bunch of note types and subtypes in ZIMS that everybody across the zoo can pick to enter their information. We took it a step further and we looked at when we rolled out ZIMS, we looked at all the note types and subtypes, and we picked the minimum number to be able to adequately capture the information with the least number of note types, because it's really the subtypes where people go crazy and everybody's got a different interpretation of it. And then you've got a database full of records that everybody's took a different take on how it should be entered. So we're really strict about that, and we do compliance checks, and if they're not using the approved note types and they enter information into the wrong buckets, they have to go then redirect that and do all the work of getting it back in the right place. Lily checks on them twice a year. She'll send them a list and say, hey, you didn't use the approved note type for that information, you need to redirect it. Veterinary information is entered by the licensed veterinarians or vet techs only. So it's a module within ZIMS. It's called the ZIMS medical module, and it's in ZIMS, but it's separate from husbandry. So that's how we keep those things separated. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really important with public requests for information, because you don't want to have, if they're doing a public request for veterinary information, you're not going to give them a husbandry information. And if they're requesting husbandry information, it's not good if you're finding veterinary type information, keepers making diagnosis when they're not veterinarians. So those two databases have to be kept very separate.
Hi, this is Carol.
Mhm.
I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, have you found that your zoo has been held up as an example, I guess, to other members of the AZA, or do other teams from other zoos come and visit to see how you have your system set up as kind of a state-of-the-art?
Well, I
Uh,
think that our zoo in general has a very high profile in the zoological community, the AZA community. We have a lot of our staff leads the what they call the species survival plan. So all the organized captive breeding programs. We have a huge research staff. We have conservation centers around the world. So we do have a really high profile. I think that I have done, you know, I've tried to set that same bar for records management and for the registrar position. I have been, every milestone that we have done at our zoo as far as records management, I have presented presentations for 30 plus years at multiple associations, whether it's AZA or ARMA or ZRA, the Zoological Registrars Association, trying to share best practices. We implemented the ICRM mentorship program. I've been serving as an ICRM facilitator since 2008. We've been doing annual workshops. All of that, it's the advocacy piece for records management and for elevating the zoological registrar position in general, but especially for records management, that, as I said, I made that a commitment to advance REM, to help registrars get the skills they need, have the professional development they need. And AZA took notice of that, I believe, over time, and that's why they came to me and asked me to lead the task force for the records. They knew I had the information. You know, I went to ARMA and I said, what all can I share with the AZA board, the accreditation commission, to help them understand? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is, you know, the principles. I gave them all the major works, and ARMA gave me permission to share that information, and then anything that was publicly available that I could share, common use or whatever they call it. And that's how we got it done. And they, you know, they accepted that, yeah, we really do need to modernize our processes. And so, yeah, I'm just blessed. I'm just thankful. Not braggadocious. I'm thankful that they gave me the opportunity to bring all that information in and to help us have those standards. The people down the road, long after I'm retired, are going to have a way easier time because of those standards being in place. So there's no other zoo I'd want to work for. There's lots of great zoos out there, but I'm not leaving now. Jeez. Not going and starting over somewhere else. I don't have the energy for that.
Okay, my other question is, what the heck is a hellbender?
So it's an amphibian. I'll have to, let me see if I can.
Don't show it. I looked it up. Don't show it.
Okay. Yeah, it's Beth, you're on my Facebook. I recently shared the news, the press release about them finding the first animal, you know, that the animals that were released, that were captive born and then released in the wild, have now produced their first offspring. I know you have that. I don't know if you could share it with everyone else if you have
Okay,
the
I'll post it on our Facebook page if
Yeah.
it's the permissions allow for it.
Yeah, I know you can share it. We've been sharing it all over.
You
Okay,
can Google it. You just put Hellbender in Google and you get a whole bunch of images of them.
Yeah,
That
they're
bad,
pretty
huh?
cool. They're big. They're big salamanders.
they have them in West Virginia.
Yeah, and Arkansas, too. I think there's several places, several states where they're native, but the water, I think the contamination in the rivers and stuff was a big part of why they declined. Oh.
I had that same question, Carol. That's why I looked it up. I have a question, if it's okay. Well, I have a personal question.
Okay.
Where did you go to school in northern Wisconsin?
Northland College, right on Lake Superior in Ashland.
I spent 7 summers up in Boulder Junction, Wisconsin,
Oh yeah.
Highway M. So I know just where that is.
Yeah, I was really close to the Madeline Islands. And 2 hours, so Ashland's 2 hours north of Duluth, 4 hours north of Minneapolis, and it's 2 hours from the Canadian border. And that Isle Royale, where the wolves and all that have this perfect harmony, where their numbers and everything are always in balance. I can just still kick myself that I never went to see that because I was so close to it.
I hiked that as a teenager.
You did? You were there?
Yeah, we took the ferry. And we have a former board member who's retired and went and lived up there. Peter.
Oh, wow. Well, it was a cool place, and I love the college professors. They were so cool. You'd have to stay up there to teach. I mean, just to commit to living there was rough. I mean, oh my goodness. I don't know how I survived. I had a Ford Mustang. I lived in this apartment, and the snowplow guy would come along and he would just completely cover my car. I mean, it was completely covered. And I'd have to take my battery out at night and put it in the living room. And then the locks would freeze. I'd put carpets under my back tires because I didn't have snow tires. 2 years of that, I was like, I am not going back up there. Yeah, it was rough. But they were great. It was great to go to school there, but it was just not for me. So.
Any other questions? Let's see, let's check the chat, make sure there's nothing else in there.
Okay.
This is Carol Bickford. I wanted to say accolades to you for your very long career and doing it right.
Oh, thank you. Well, there was some, there were some hard things. It wasn't always easy, but I'm glad I hung in there and didn't give up. That's all I can say, is because not a lot of people stay at the same place for that long. And I don't know how the RIM programs get done in the other scenario where you've got people leaving. They're leaving. And who's the champion? And what happens to funding? And, I've had defeats, but I've always been able to come on, and then I've always been there, and I'm there at I don't want to say the end of the road, but if I leave tomorrow, I think I'm leaving it in a much better state than when I found it. And that's what makes me feel good, is I always want to leave something a little better than what it was when I found it. So, but I don't know. I mean, a lot of you work for huge companies. I would ask you, geez, if you're working for the federal government or you're working for a pharmaceutical company or whatever it is, it just seems like you don't have a lot of control over what happens to your program sometimes. Am I wrong? Or
you must have a very supportive IT department.
Yeah, we do. Well, and I've worked hard, when we go to cloud hosting, they were very supportive. It took a while. No, we couldn't go cloud hosting, but what was interesting with DocuWare, when we first did the RFP and we bought into that, 80% of their clients were locally hosted. And when we made the switch in 2020, that was exactly opposite. 80% of their clients were cloud hosted. So that that statement was all IT needed to hear. They're like, all right, we're good done. I mean, they really, their continuity plan and the data protection and all of that, DocuWare was able to exceed what we could do at the zoo with locally hosted. So we had better protection. We had, just better processes. IT didn't have to deal with it anymore. We had 200 computers that had that DocuWare printer, and every time, they were getting calls all the time that it wasn't working correctly. So all of that went away. And the same thing with Zims. When we went to cloud hosted with Zims, they spent a lot of time supporting both of those programs prior to that. So yeah, they're happy. So it was hard. It was hard though, doing those first cloud hosting agreements. Everybody had to look at it. I mean, it took forever to get everyone through that first agreement because it was the first time we had done it. So, it was hard. All right. Well, I know you guys probably want to eat dinner or do something other than listen to me ramble.
Yeah, I think looks like that's the last of the questions. So we will say thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Rae Lynn.
You're welcome.
We were glad to have you. And again, there are opportunities on the Metro Maryland board. So we encourage you to take advantage of them. We will be in touch about the future webinars and programs that we have coming up. And we'll say good night to everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Rae.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.